So this is the beginning and end of the video. Basically I do a bookend video. This is a Hampton Bay 10 by 10 metal gazebo. In this application it's being used as a hot tub cover. The Hampton Bay product line is sold at Home Depot in the United States. And I'm not sure about Lowe's. It's possible that it's a special order Lowe's item, but this one came from Home Depot, right? And so we'll go into the procedure on the assembly process. You can look through the owner's manual on this. It'll give you some pointers, but it's not very good. One of the things we run into is it says assembly continued, step 1. A little bit of a publishing problem they had on this. The inventory card I'll go over in another segment, but it's relatively straightforward. I would call this an intermediate level difficulty project. Very similar to setting up, let's say, one of the larger military tents. Actually, the cost is very similar, but this structure would be more permanent. I would call it a pretty good 20-year structure. Getting over that might have issues with hail damage or rust or things like that, but a good 20-year structure that can be partially enclosed with screen or other upgrades as time goes on. So this will be the assembly video on the Hampton Bay Harbor 10-foot 10 by 10 metal gazebo kit from Home Depot. And we'll get into the unpacking phase. I've done some of the larger and smaller ones on these. I'll expect to take about a half hour to unpack. They do a pretty neat, tidy packaging on our screws and stuff here. This grid is to protect it during shipment. This isn't part of it. This is, we'll take this apart and then take our pieces out of it, and I'll show you the next segment. As this stuff is getting unpacked, I'm going to explain the tools involved. It's really nice that they laid all this stuff out in the card. That way you kind of know where you're at with your nuts and bolts as you go. And don't prematurely unpack nuts and bolts. Kind of do them as you get to a stage. Now, in pulling a sample of this out, and not really trying to figure this out, because this says M6, which originally had me thinking metric 6mm, I just thought, wow, that's a big 6mm. Okay, here's reality, is that these are 10mm. So 10mm is going to be the size that you use throughout this project. There's also a bunch that are a Phillips head, or one of those combination cross slot heads, if you can catch the light on that. And that's more of a number 3 large Phillips, not a number 2. A number 1 just going to spin in there and strip. But a number 2 will work. So I'm going to use number 2 on this. Probably go back to the truck, try to find a number 3. It's just that when we crank this stuff down, it's thin metal. It's possible to over tighten and strip stuff out when you're using a impact driver. So I'm going to use a drill on this that I've set up, again, so we can speed things up a little bit. And we're turning this down, turning down the speed, and going to turn down the torque as I kind of test this stuff and make sure I'm not going to over torque and strip stuff out. Unpacking, if you're working alone, is going to take an hour, but you're going to reach a point where it takes 2 people to put this together, mainly because you've got to have a second person holding stuff up. The other thing is to make sure you don't let the garbage get away on you. We're going to lay the roof panels on the side because they tend to be done last. And we just want to get everything unpacked, be able to look at the labels, because it'll become important to know where your labels are, especially since a lot of times you end up with some left side, right side pieces that can be difficult to tell apart. So you got to have a large enough area to work through on this. Kind of a clever design on this. They built the corners with that roughly 18 inch of extension out there, so that the side pieces, each of the 4 sides, is a single piece. We don't have to put those together like I did that slightly larger gazebo in one of my other videos. And so we just lay this out in kind of an area. These things weighs a little over 300 pounds fully assembled, but I think 2 strong guys can move this into place. But everything in the instructions, which appear to be missing pages, but I checked the instructions in both English and Spanish, talks about assembling the roof and then putting the legs under the gazebo. So that's pretty much what we're going to do. Is we're going to assemble the roof, and then put the legs under it. But to get this square structure, I'm probably going to start out doing this upside down, then flip it over to put everything else on. Say again on this is you're using the 10mm bolts with washers to secure this. The screws will fit right in these holes and work, but that's wrong. Those screws will need to be going on the roof, not on the frame structure. Okay, so these are the fasteners that you'll be using on this, and it's basically one bolt, one washer. A little side note, because this gets glossed over in the instructions and there's not much detail in the written instructions about this, is that this is a little sub-assembly for the roof cap, and it's so that it's a vented thing. You're not going to have a tremendous amount of heat or smoke buildup underneath, and it's a separate assembly. Now, the way these structures are made is a little bit of compensation for, let's say, uneven ground or something like that. And what I'm finding is that to get everything together, you don't want to super tighten it until it's kind of all, you got to have a feel for which parts you tighten and which ones you don't. And on this, we're using the Phillips head on one side, 10mm nut on the other. I'm putting these in finger tight, so there's some looseness to this, and I'm not going to tighten that until it's attached to the rest of the roof structure. The other thing I'm running into is as we pre-assemble these legs, and we're just about to pre-assemble the structure that's going to hold the top on, we need this thing to be light enough to carry around before it's up, and we don't want to be bumping into trees while we get it on a deck. So I'm going to depart from the written instructions a little bit, because I've built a few different designs on gazebos, others from this company. And on some of the other designs, they involve putting the top metal on after the whole structure is more or less up. And when we deal with that kind of situation, it weighs less, right? So I've got a ladder, and that's not going to hurt me to do it that way. The instructions that go over basically assembling the entire top when it's on the ground like this are what you could do if you don't have a ladder handy. It doesn't turn it into a one-man job. It's still a two-man job, but that's how you would do this without using a ladder. So to show what we're doing, because we've got to get this maneuvered around some trees, we're doing a partial assembly here. As we'll lift up one side, get the legs kind of slid on. They slide onto the stub post there. And then that allows him to get a few bolts to secure that. We've got a lot of the structure up, but there's still some pieces that go crossways. The reason we're not building this whole thing on the roof before going up is that it's going to get too heavy to move very easily when that happens. And I'd rather, I have a ladder, we'd rather work on a ladder than try to hump this 300-pound thing. Although you're right to do it either way. The other thing we're going to do is we're just doing all this stuff finger tight at this point. So see, there's a lot of fudge factor in the wiggle room. We're going to have that in place, and we're going to have to run around tightening all that before we put the roof panels on. But right now we just lift one side, get the legs under there. Once they're relatively secure but not fully cranked down, we'll lift the other side. We'll get this thing up on four legs and get it up here on the deck a little bit more into position, and then we're going to start putting in cross braces and tightening things down. You notice as these pieces go in and they get screwed in and we tighten them, a little ding thing, corners stick up, but there's a lot of leeway in the way the panels work too. So at this stage, once we're up, I'm going around and tightening everything. Okay, so as we tighten it, it becomes a lot stronger, a lot stiffer. As we're adding metal pieces, obviously it'll become heavier, and you'll get more of that final rigid structure. One of the things I'm noticing on this, it's kind of a function of the way this angle is that all the legs kind of point inward a little bit, which it's because of the curvature on these things. If you want to tweak them out to level them, you could. I mean, you could. It's a matter of putting it under tension. But what I'm noticing is we get all of this together. Unlike some of the larger structures on these types of designs, this one, as it's webbed in, as all the security points go in, it's really, really strong. So we're getting all this together a couple hours into it. I'd say we're 2 solid hours into it. And 3 hours, 4 hours, 2 guys, 4 hours, you'll be done. Things get kind of tricky up here. We got these triangle pieces that are going to set in here, and we've got these other screw points, but that's entirely held in by some angle pieces that go down. We also have this top. You want to, when you screw this on, don't crank it down tight. You need to have some space for the other stuff to get under it. And of course this piece remains a little loose up here because the tightening is here. But these you got to crank down nice and tight. Okay, so these you would use the impact on the crank down nice and tight. So you just kind of take a look for future reference on where the orientation on all this goes. And again, I think I'm better doing this on a ladder than I'm doing it on the ground and then trying to lift it into place at full weight. We are nearing completion, and basically you start at one section and you work yourself from left to right. Not too many screws secure these, and they only go on the corners. They don't go in the middle. What happens in the middle is the lips between the corrugations and the pieces. Now see how that lifts up? There's another cross piece that's going to go in and hold the bottoms of those down so that the wind doesn't grab that and pull it away. If you want to reinforce that later on with some other material, you could, but the way this is designed, it's going to be relatively secure once all that's in. All these pieces relatively match. There's a logical sequence, but basically you want to work your way around and then make sure that the way things work out with what's accessible to you, that you have a plan of action for being able to reach something so that you're not painting yourself into a corner, so to speak, on that. The other thing is, part of the finishing touch is remember to pull the stickers, little label stickers off the stuff. And so as you can see, we're getting the finishing touches on the roof. Just to illustrate how those roof sections work on a pyramid roof, is that a pyramid roof is basically 4 triangles. Now on this one we've got that top cap for a few different reasons. One of which, if you have a barbecue grill or something in there, it functions as a chimney, not to trap a lot of smoke and heat inside. And the way this is held on, there's not a lot of screws holding this to the superstructure. What happens is there's some additional bars that go in. So as you set these on, there's a sequence. You go right to left or left to right. The more I look at this, the more I realize it's kind of built to go right to left, but it's not the end of the world if you go left to right. I mean, it's just not. So what will get tricky is the very last one. So if you got ladders, it's not the end of the world, and it'll all go right in. And there it is, all done and installed, and this will look a lot like the beginning of the video. One of the things to look out for on this is to make sure that if we've got a little staircase leading into the hot tub, that you don't have this where it's such a low overhang you bump your head. On the other hand, they want, full rain cover on this too. We're bolting this to the deck with a single bolt on each corner. You can put up to 4 bolts on each corner. It depends on local weather and whether or not you want to kind of beat up the deck with screw holes, or if you're in Hurricane and Tornado Alley, then yeah, you really want to bolt this thing down. It's over 300 pounds, but that doesn't mean it won't blow away in a super strong wind. Good strong structure. I think we would be around 4 hours on this. We're a little under 4 hours getting this together. But normally, and I'm relatively experienced, I'd put together a few like this. So, I'd call this a 2-man, 4-hour project.